I was always the kind of person who believed in giving without expecting anything in return, who believed that helping others made the world a better place, who thought that listening to someone when no one else cared was a strength, who stayed up late to finish work for others, who remembered every birthday, who went out of my way to bring a smile to people's faces, and I was proud of it. I genuinely thought that my kindness was my superpower and that being there for others would always bring good into my life, and for a while it did, until she appeared in my world. Sanaa was like a whirlwind of charm and confidence. She had this way of walking into a room and instantly capturing everyone's attention with her effortless smile and her sparkling eyes, and I was no exception. I was drawn to her immediately. I wanted to be around her, to hear her laugh, to see her smile, to be a part of her seemingly perfect life. She called me her safe place, and I believed her because it felt good to feel needed, to feel that my presence mattered to someone so captivating. She would come to me with all her troubles, about family issues, about financial struggles, about heartbreaks, and I would listen patiently, offering advice, support, comfort, and reassurance, even when my own life was chaotic, even when I was tired, even when I had my own problems that needed attention. I put her first. I became her confidant, her constant, the one she could rely on without hesitation, and every time she expressed gratitude, I felt my heart swell with warmth and pride. She said things like, "Only you understand me," or "I don't know what I would do without you," and I believed her completely. I believed that our friendship was mutual, that there was a bond of trust and care between us that was unbreakable, and I never doubted it until slowly things began to shift, subtly, almost imperceptibly. At first I didn't recognize the signs. I dismissed the pangs of discomfort. I ignored the growing unease within me because I wanted to trust her. I wanted to believe in the goodness of our friendship. I wanted to continue being the person who gave endlessly and freely, but the truth was that while I was giving everything I had, she was quietly taking it all for herself. She would borrow money and never pay it back. She would share my ideas with others as if they were her own. She would manipulate situations in her favor, leaving me confused, hurt, and questioning myself. Yet I ignored the warning signs. I excused her behavior because I wanted to see the best in her, because I wanted to hold on to the friendship that felt so vital and so necessary in my life. I reminded myself that friends make mistakes, that people have bad days, that everyone deserves patience and understanding, and I practiced those things tirelessly because I believed that by doing so I was helping the world be a better place, and maybe even helping her be a better person. And for a while everything seemed fine. Our bond seemed strong, her laughter seemed genuine, her expressions of gratitude seemed heartfelt, and I allowed myself to believe that my sacrifices were meaningful, that my kindness was appreciated and respected. But beneath the surface there was a growing pattern of subtle exploitation that I couldn't yet name. She would call me in the middle of my own busy day, needing my help. She would text me incessantly, expecting instant responses. She would demand favors as if they were owed to her, and when I hesitated, she would guilt me into compliance with those soft words that had selfish intent behind a veneer of vulnerability and innocence, and I fell for it every single time because I wanted to be the person who was always there, who always helped, who never turned away, who always gave. And with each passing day, the more I gave, the more she seemed to take. The more I gave, the more I lost a piece of myself, a piece of my energy, my time, my dignity, and I didn't even notice it until it had grown so large that it was impossible to ignore. And looking back now, I see the pattern so clearly: the constant demands, the subtle manipulations, the way she framed everything as a desperate need only I could fulfill, the way she positioned herself as fragile and helpless and me as the only one capable of supporting her. It was brilliant and cruel at the same time, and I was blind to it, blinded by my desire to help, by my belief in the inherent goodness of people, by my unwavering loyalty, by my conviction that being kind was always the right thing to do. I thought that kindness was strength, that giving endlessly without question was noble, that always putting others first was virtuous. But I was learning the hard way that there is a line between kindness and weakness, that being too giving can be dangerous, that trust without boundaries can be exploited, and that not everyone who smiles at you truly cares for you or has your best interests at heart. And all of this realization came slowly, painfully, in fragments of moments where I would notice the little things she did, where I would see her delight in my efforts while she simultaneously undermined me, where I would hear her laughter with someone else while I was quietly helping her, and in those moments my heart would ache a little more, and a part of me would start to question myself, to doubt the reality I had trusted so fully. But still I clung to the friendship, to the idea of her as a person who needed me, and to my own identity as the one who gave endlessly, until one day I began to see it clearly, the way she had taken my trust for granted, the way she had taken my kindness for weakness, the way she had used my loyalty for her benefit. And in that moment I realized that the person I thought I knew, the person I believed was grateful and sincere, was someone else entirely, someone who thrived on the generosity of others, someone who disguised selfishness as vulnerability, someone who had played me from the very start. And it was crushing because I had invested so much time, so much energy, so much love, so much trust, and I had done so willingly, thinking it was my strength, thinking it was my virtue, thinking it was my gift to the world. And now I saw that the very thing I had believed in the most had been the very thing that had been used against me. And yet in that painful revelation there was a spark of awakening, a tiny flicker of understanding that kindness alone, without boundaries, without self-respect, without awareness, can be dangerous, and that sometimes even the kindest hearts must learn to protect themselves and guard their trust. And so I sat with this knowledge and with this ache in my heart, and I promised myself that I would never again allow someone to take my generosity for granted, that I would never again let my kindness be mistaken for weakness, that I would learn to recognize manipulation, to understand the motives behind smiles, to protect my heart even while continuing to give to the world, because I knew that true strength was not just in giving endlessly, but in knowing when to step back, when to say no, when to defend oneself, when to rise above betrayal. And that is where my journey began, the journey of realizing that my kindness was my strength, but that it also needed armor, and that one day the girl who thought she could use me would face the consequences of underestimating the person she had hurt. And so I carried on with a quiet determination, a simmering awareness, and a growing sense that I would reclaim my power, and that every moment I had spent giving would one day become the foundation of the reckoning that was to come. And even as I looked at her, the charming, deceitful girl who had captivated me, the girl who had taken my trust for granted, I felt no immediate anger, no immediate desire to confront, no immediate reaction at all. I simply felt clarity, and that clarity was far more potent than any immediate action, because it gave me time to plan, to prepare, to build a version of myself that she could no longer manipulate or use. And in that clarity there was an odd sense of peace, because I understood at last that my strength had never been in allowing myself to be taken advantage of, but in the capacity to recognize it, to endure it, and to transform it into something greater. And in that moment the chapter of naive kindness that had once defined me began to close, and a new chapter of awareness, strategy, and quiet power was ready to begin, a chapter that would not end until justice and balance had been restored. And so I carried on with the same smile, the same outward generosity, but with an inner vigilance, a sharpness, and a readiness for the day when the scales would finally tip, and the person who thought they could use me would realize for the first time that my kindness was never weakness, it was the quiet calm before the storm that was about to change everything forever. Betrayal never arrives all at once, it creeps in, slowly hiding behind smiles, polite words, and gestures that seem harmless, until one day you wake up and realize that everything you believed in has been used against you. And that is exactly what happened with Sanaa. I trusted her with my ideas, my time, my energy, my patience, and my heart, thinking that our bond was mutual, thinking that she valued me as much as I valued her. And at first I ignored the small signs of manipulation, the little moments where she took credit for something I had done, or subtly positioned herself in a way that made her look better in front of others. I convinced myself that it was nothing, a misunderstanding, a coincidence, a lapse in memory. I told myself that it was normal, that people sometimes forgot the efforts of others, and that she probably did not mean any harm. And I forgave her over and over again, because I wanted to preserve the friendship, because I wanted to see the best in her, because I wanted to believe that kindness and loyalty were enough to maintain a genuine connection. But slowly the small things began to add up, the way she would casually mention achievements that were originally mine, the way she would repeat ideas I had spent hours crafting as if they were her own, the way she would receive praise for tasks I had completed, and sometimes the way she would look at me with that innocent smile as if she were unaware of what she had done. Each incident left a pang of doubt and hurt inside me, yet I continued to suppress it in the hope that I was imagining things, that maybe my perception was wrong, that perhaps I was overthinking, and it was just her way of being confident and assertive. At first it was bearable. I told myself that it did not matter, that the bigger picture of friendship was more important than petty grievances. But then the incidents escalated, and the escalation hit me like a punch. I started noticing that my work was being used in meetings, presentations, and reports without any acknowledgement, that she would stand in front of our colleagues and managers and speak as if she had done everything on her own, that she would smile as accolades were directed towards her, while I quietly sat in the shadows wondering when the moment would come when someone would see the truth. But it did not happen. I remained unnoticed, unacknowledged, and increasingly frustrated, and yet I still hesitated to confront her, because confrontation meant risking the friendship, risking the fragile balance that we had maintained over the years. And I kept giving her the benefit of the doubt, telling myself that she was ambitious, that she wanted to succeed, that everyone had a right to seek recognition. And I tried to rationalize the way she exploited my kindness as just a means to an end, as if she could not have achieved success without a little help from those who believed in her, and then came the day when the truth became undeniable, when the carefully hidden mask she wore slipped ever so slightly and revealed the person she really was. I had arrived at work earlier than usual, and as I walked through the quiet office I heard laughter that made my blood run cold. The familiar voice of Sanaa filled the room, and I realized with a sinking heart that she was talking about me and about everything I had done to help her. I froze in the hallway, hidden behind the doorway, unable to move, unable to speak, as her words reached my ears and cut deeper than anything I had experienced before. She said she knew exactly how easy I was to manipulate, that all my generosity and patience were nothing more than weaknesses she could exploit to get what she wanted, and that I was completely oblivious to the fact that she had never cared for me at all. The casual tone in her voice, the ease with which she dismissed my feelings as irrelevant, the way she laughed as if it were all a game, shattered something inside me. It was not just betrayal, it was humiliation, the realization that everything I had done, everything I had given, everything I had believed in had been used against me to further her own selfish ambitions. The endless nights I spent helping her, the sacrifices I made to ensure she succeeded, the trust I placed in her, thinking that friendship was a sacred bond, it all felt like a lie, a cruel joke at my expense. And in that moment I understood fully that kindness without awareness is dangerous, that loyalty without boundaries is exploitable, that giving without discernment can make you prey for those who thrive on the generosity of others. And I wanted to confront her, to scream, to demand answers, to make her feel the weight of the betrayal. I wanted to unleash all the anger and pain that had been simmering inside me for so long, but I did not. I walked away. I left the office quietly, my hands shaking, my heart pounding, my mind racing with a mixture of disbelief and dawning clarity. I realized that this was a turning point, a moment where I could choose to continue being a victim or to rise above the manipulation and reclaim my power. And as I stepped out of the building, I promised myself that I would no longer allow someone to exploit my kindness, that I would no longer be blind to deceit, that I would no longer let my loyalty be a tool for someone else's gain. I spent the next days reflecting on everything she had done. I replayed conversations in my head, analyzed emails and messages, traced back every favor, every sacrifice, every moment I had put her before myself, and in doing so I began to see patterns. I began to understand the method behind her manipulation, the way she had carefully conditioned me to believe in her innocence while systematically undermining me. And I realized that the anger I felt was not just about the stolen credit, it was about the violation of trust, the betrayal of belief, the realization that someone I had opened my heart to had treated me as a means to an end. And slowly that anger transformed into something else. It became clarity, a cold, calculated focus on what I needed to do to reclaim my dignity and restore balance in my life. I did not want petty revenge. I did not want public humiliation. I wanted justice and recognition for the truth. I wanted the world to see her as she really was, and me as the person she had underestimated. The more I thought, the more I understood that the most powerful response would not be impulsive, it would be strategic. It would require patience, observation, and timing. It would require me to step back and let the universe align. It would require me to gather proof, to protect myself, to document every instance of deceit and misrepresentation. And in that preparation there was a strange sense of empowerment. I was no longer the naive friend blindly giving. I was no longer the person whose kindness had been mistaken for weakness. I was becoming someone who could harness that same kindness into strength, who could turn what had been used against me into the foundation for my reclamation. And every night I went to bed replaying her words in my mind, analyzing her tone, her motives, and planning my next steps. And with each passing day the hurt began to cool slightly, replaced by determination and a quiet readiness for the day when I would not just reveal the truth, but do so in a way that left no room for denial, no way for her to manipulate the narrative. I wanted the world to see her for who she really was, and me for the person she had tried to deceive but underestimated. And as I lay awake, I imagined the day when the betrayal would be confronted, when the proof would speak for itself, when I would finally stand strong and unshaken. And I knew that day was coming. It was only a matter of time, and until then I continued to observe, to document, to plan, to grow stronger in silence. And in that silence there was power, the kind of power that comes from being wronged and choosing not to respond with anger alone, but with strategy, foresight, and the unwavering belief that justice must be served. And the person who thought they could take advantage of my heart, my mind, my talents, and my generosity would soon learn the hardest lesson of all, that kindness is never weakness, but that it can be the prelude to a reckoning that is inevitable, unstoppable, and profoundly satisfying. And so I waited, and I prepared, and I promised myself that when the moment came I would not just stand in truth, I would rise in it, and she would regret underestimating me. And that is how betrayal became the fuel that transformed my pain into a quiet but unstoppable force, ready to reclaim what had been taken and restore balance in a world that had for a time seemed tipped in her favor but would soon, I knew, bend back toward justice and recognition. I still helped those who were genuine, still offered support to those who truly needed it, but I no longer gave blindly, no longer sacrificed myself for someone who would exploit me, no longer allowed my loyalty to be weaponized against me. And in this period of self-reflection, I also began to formulate a plan, a method to reveal the truth in a way that was undeniable, not just to her but to everyone who had witnessed her deceit and benefited from it. And I knew that I would not act recklessly or emotionally. I would let patience guide me, let strategy shape me, let every move be calculated, every word considered, every document secured, so that when the day came there would be no doubt, no ambiguity, no escape from the truth. And in preparing, I also healed. I healed the hurt, the anger, the humiliation that had threatened to consume me. Forgave myself for trusting too much, for believing too deeply, for giving too freely, because I realized that my only mistake had been in not recognizing the exploitation sooner. And now, armed with awareness, that same heart that had been open and kind was now strong, resilient, and focused on ensuring that fairness would prevail. And as the days turned into weeks, I began to see how powerful silence could be, how effectively it could dismantle someone who thrived on control and manipulation, how observation could become a weapon, how patience could become a shield. And I watched as she tried desperately to regain her footing. She reached out to colleagues, she tried to rebuild her reputation, she attempted to cover her mistakes with charm and excuses, she sought validation in every corner, yet her efforts were hollow because the foundation she had built had always been constructed on the work of others, and without my contributions it was unstable and fragile. And the more I observed, the more I realized that the most satisfying revenge would not be public humiliation, not a dramatic confrontation, not an emotional outburst, but a methodical unveiling of the truth in a way that could not be denied, a revelation that would leave no room for manipulation, no space for lies, no avenue for her to escape accountability. And I felt a calm certainty that when the moment arrived, I would not just prove the truth, I would demonstrate my strength, my intelligence, my resilience, my integrity, and the difference between someone who gives with love and someone who takes with selfishness. And all the while I continued to maintain a semblance of normalcy. In my interactions with others at work, in life, in social circles, I smiled, I engaged, I participated in conversations as if nothing had happened, yet every action was deliberate, every word measured, every gesture purposeful, because I had learned that appearing passive and harmless could be more powerful than confrontation when combined with strategy and evidence. And in this time of preparation, I also reflected on my own behavior, the ways I had allowed myself to be exploited, the boundaries I had failed to set, the assumptions I had made about human nature, the trust one had extended without discernment. And I took responsibility for my own growth and awareness, so that when the reckoning arrived, I would not only be vindicated but also transformed into a person wiser, stronger, and prepared for any future challenges. And in this quiet reflection, I realized that revenge was not about cruelty or malice, it was about restoring balance, about demonstrating integrity, about asserting the truth, and about proving that even the most patient and kind heart can rise when tested, and that timing is everything, that patience is power, that observation is insight, and that preparation is the ultimate weapon. And as the weeks passed, I noticed the anxiety that began to creep into her demeanor, the subtle changes in her behavior, the way she floundered when faced with tasks I had once managed for her, the way her confidence wavered, the way colleagues began to notice inconsistencies and gaps. And I felt no satisfaction in her struggle, only in the knowledge that the universe was aligning the scales, that justice was preparing to assert itself, and that my quiet resilience had created the conditions for truth to emerge. And I knew that when the day came, when the presentation was scheduled, when the meeting was held, when the world was paying attention, the revelation would be undeniable, and it would not require theatrics, it would not require shouting, it would not require aggression, it would require only clarity, evidence, and calm execution. And I felt a thrill, not of anger but of anticipation, because I understood that the culmination of patience, strategy, and awareness is a power unmatched, a force that cannot be ignored or dismissed. And as I reflected on this, I realized that the silence I had maintained, the patience I had practiced, the observations I had made, and the plans I had formulated were all part of a larger process, a process that would not only reveal the truth but also restore my dignity and assert my strength. And in that realization, I felt a sense of peace, a sense of readiness, a sense of certainty that the betrayal I had endured was only the beginning of a journey toward empowerment, and the knowledge that the girl who had exploited me would soon face the undeniable consequences of underestimating someone who had once given everything freely and who had now learned to hold back until the moment was right. And as I prepared for that moment, I carried within me the understanding that revenge is not chaos, it is calculated, it is purposeful, it is inevitable when nurtured with patience and observation, and that the strongest hearts are not broken by betrayal, they are forged by it into instruments of clarity and justice, and so I waited and I watched and I strengthened and I healed and I planned, and I knew with absolute certainty that the day of revelation would come and it would be undeniable, and the person who had taken advantage of my kindness would understand at last that I had never been weak, that I had never been naive, that I had simply been waiting and preparing for the right time to rise and reclaim what had been stolen, and that day would be mine, and it would be complete and satisfying and powerful. And that is how the quiet before the storm became my greatest ally, and the period of silence and observation became the foundation of the reckoning that was to come. The day I had been preparing for finally arrived, the day when all the patience, observation, planning, and quiet strength I had cultivated would come together into a moment of undeniable truth and vindication. I walked into the office early that morning, my mind clear, my purpose focused, my heart calm and steady, knowing that everything I had endured, every slight, every betrayal, every manipulation had been building to this moment. And when I entered the meeting room, I saw her standing there, confident, poised, smiling as if the world belonged to. I allowed myself to observe the irony, the way she had relied on my ideas, my work, my support to create the illusion of competence, the way she had assumed that without me she would continue to shine effortlessly, the way she had never imagined that I could quietly gather proof, document evidence, and prepare for this exact scenario. And as the meeting began, she launched into her presentation full of energy and confidence, but I noticed immediately the cracks in her performance, the hesitation, the lack of depth, the inability to answer detailed questions, because without my input, without my guidance, without the foundation of my work, she was exposed. And I remained silent at first, allowing her to struggle, allowing the room to perceive her weaknesses, allowing the truth to emerge naturally, while I sat poised, calm, collected, and ready to act at the right moment. And then came the moment when our manager asked a specific question, one that required detailed knowledge of the project, one that only the person who had actually completed the work could answer. She faltered, her smile wavered, her confidence shook, and the room turned to me, and in that instant I knew it was time. I stood up with calm authority and offered to explain the section with the manager's permission, and as I began to present, I walked the room through every step, every strategy, every detail, every decision, every document, every draft, every email, every meeting, every contribution I had made to the project, showing not just my knowledge but the exact timeline of my involvement. And then I revealed the proof, the evidence of her manipulation, the documents, the timestamps, the messages, the drafts that showed clearly that the work she had claimed as her own had in fact originated from me. And as I presented, the room fell silent, the air thick with tension, the truth undeniable, the credibility undeniable, the betrayal laid bare. And I watched as her confident mask crumbled, as the color drained from her face, as the charm that had once captivated everyone evaporated in the face of irrefutable fact. And I spoke calmly. I did not shout, I did not insult, I simply stated the truth clearly and with conviction. I explained my contributions, my sacrifices, my support, my guidance, and the ways she had taken advantage of my generosity. And the room listened and understood, and in that moment the power dynamic shifted completely. The promotion she had expected, the recognition she had assumed was hers alone, vanished. The colleagues who had once admired her realized the extent of her deceit, and I felt a surge of quiet satisfaction, not from malice but from justice being restored, not from revenge and anger but from truth being revealed. And as I concluded the presentation and returned to my seat, she remained silent, unable to speak, unable to defend herself, unable to manipulate the narrative as all her previous tactics failed. And in that silence I realized something profound, that the sweetest revenge is not loud, it is not dramatic, it is not filled with confrontation and aggression, it is quiet, calculated, and undeniable. It is evidence, patience, strategy, and clarity, all combined to allow the truth to shine through. And as the meeting ended, the manager praised my work, acknowledged my contributions, and made it clear to everyone in the room that I had been the driving force behind the project. The recognition I had been denied for so long finally granted, the respect I had always deserved finally affirmed my value, finally restored my dignity. And as I left the room, I felt a weight lifted from my shoulders, a release of all the hurt, frustration, and betrayal that had built up inside me over the past months. And I understood fully that my kindness, my patience, my initial willingness to give freely had never been weakness. It had been strength. It had been a foundation on which I had built my ultimate vindication. And I also understood that my actions had been transformative, not just for myself, but for others who had witnessed the truth. Realizing that sometimes being too kind is dangerous, but being aware, patient, and strategic transforms kindness into a formidable power. And as I walked through the office, I noticed the looks on my colleagues' faces: admiration, respect, our recognition of the calm strength and intelligence that I had displayed, the realization that the person they had once believed to be easily manipulated was in fact formidable, prepared, and unassailable. And as I passed her desk, I saw the shame, the regret, the shock, the disbelief in her eyes, and I felt no gloating satisfaction, no delight in her humiliation, only a quiet understanding that she had underestimated me, that she had misjudged my strength, that she had forgotten that even the kindest hearts know when to stop giving and start protecting and asserting themselves. And in that moment I felt a profound sense of completion, of balance, restorative justice served not through anger, not through revenge for revenge's sake, but through truth, clarity, and integrity. And as the day continued and colleagues continued to acknowledge my role in the project, my contributions, my ideas, my efforts, I felt a renewed sense of self, a reaffirmation of my values, and the realization that the journey through betrayal to preparation to ultimate revelation had transformed me into someone stronger, wiser, more aware, and fully capable of ensuring that my kindness would never again be mistaken for weakness. And as the sun set and the office emptied, I reflected on the journey, the naive kindness, the betrayal, the silence, the observation, the preparation, and finally the revelation, and I understood fully that revenge is not chaos, it is strategy, it is patience, it is quiet power harnessed over time to reveal the truth and assert justice. And I also understood that true strength is not measured by the ability to endure alone, but by the capacity to recognize deceit, to prepare calmly, and to act decisively when the time is right. And as I locked my desk and walked out into the cool evening air, I felt a sense of triumph that was not loud or boastful, but profound and complete, the knowledge that I had reclaimed my power, my dignity, my recognition, my respect, and that the person who had taken advantage of my trust, my loyalty, and my generosity had finally learned the cost of underestimating someone who had been kind, not out of weakness, but out of strength. And as I left the building, I carried with me the understanding that my kindness had never been a flaw, it had been the instrument that allowed me to rise above betrayal and to assert the truth in a way that was undeniable and satisfying and powerful, and that would forever define the difference between giving from love and being used, and that the girl who had thought she could manipulate me would never again underestimate the quiet storm that kindness combined with awareness, patience, and strategy can become. And in that knowledge I felt whole, complete, empowered, vindicated, and ready for whatever life would present next, with the calm certainty that no betrayal, no exploitation, no underestimation could ever diminish the strength of a heart that gives wisely, a mind that observes patiently, and a spirit that acts decisively. And that is how the final chapter unfolded, how betrayal met strategy, how patience met opportunity, how kindness met awareness, and how the quietest heart revealed the loudest truth. And in that revelation I understood fully that the sweetest revenge is always quiet, undeniable, and deserved.